Tonight we're talking about something called church polity. What is church polity? Anybody know? Polity, church polity. It's the word used for church organization or government. It's government, basically, is what polity means, is government. How is the church run? And do we have biblical direction for how the church is managed, organized, how it's governed? And it's remarkable, really, how broad those instructions are biblically. They're not specific at all in terms of how we do government, but rather they give us an outline, a big picture from which we can adopt what the polity or government of the church should be. And so we're going to be talking about this Sunday morning with regard to what Peter tells the church. He's been talking to them about how to organize and how to be submissive in government, business, family, church, and then he's going to lay out some things for us Sunday morning as well in 1 Peter. But I want to start tonight with the qualifications of an overseer. We're going to talk about deacons, elders. Pastors fall into the category of elder, but elders are given several names biblically. Overseer is one of the names given to an elder. Bishop is another name that's given to an elder. Pastors fall into the category of elders. We are teaching elders biblically. So we're going to use all of those terms tonight, and all of them should give us an understanding of some meaning and an idea of what the responsibilities are. But before we get to responsibilities, we need to understand exactly what the qualifications are, because not just anybody can fill the role of elder or deacon or pastor or teacher. So he gives us qualifications here in 1 Peter chapter 3, beginning in the first verse. And this is the qualifications for overseer or elder, pastor, if you will. It says, "This is a faithful saying. If a man desires the position of a bishop, pastor, overseer, elder, he desires a good work. A bishop, then, must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable." And there's that word we looked at last Sunday morning. Remember what that word was? Hospitable. That the first part meaning brotherly. Brotherly love, it's phileo. Brotherly love is the first part of that Greek word. The last part means stranger, xenos. Phileo, xenos. So it's to be friendly and encouraging even to strangers. That's a higher call than the guy that lives next door. Okay? So that's hospitable. Able to teach. Not given to much wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous. One who rules his own household well, having his children in submission. There's that word again that keeps coming up in 1 Peter. Having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? It says he's not a novice. In other words, he's not a beginner. He's not just a new believer. Lest that this position would puff him up, it says. To be puffed up with pride, he may fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Moreover, he must be of good testimony. And that good testimony not only means people in the church, but people outside the church. That they go, oh yeah, I know that person. Even if they're not a Christian, that person has a good testimony. Moreover, he must be of good testimony among all those outside, lest he fall into reproach and to the snare of the devil. All the way through this, there's warnings about either falling into the role of the devil or falling into the snare or the temptation of the devil. And both of those are very strong warnings to pastors, elders, teachers, not to fall into that kind of condemnation. What the idea is the same thing that I told some of you before I ever came here, that you don't do anything that is even perceived as something that can be misconstrued or evil or not proper. I don't ride in a car with another woman without my wife present, just for an example. I don't like to be, I won't have a woman in my office and close the door unless my wife's there. Okay, those kind of things that you can't even be perceived as doing something that's improper. Why? Because the world's watching, the world's judging. And we need to be careful that even the perception of something being evil is not right. Then 1 Timothy, he goes on to tell Timothy, and this is Paul writing to Timothy. He goes on to tell Timothy what the qualifications for deacon are. I won't go over those, but let me just give it to you briefly. It's all the same qualifications for elder, with the exception of being able to teach. The deacon doesn't have the qualification of having to be able to teach. Doesn't mean that he can't teach. It just means that that's not his role. That's not a qualification to be a deacon. So all of those other qualifications have to fall into the same category as overseer or elder. So we're going to talk about some of those things tonight. Biblical structure in the church, and this will kind of lay the groundwork again for Sunday morning when we get there. Okay. Lots of different forms of government in churches. If you go to what's called a congregationalist church, the congregation makes a decision over how many light bulbs to buy. They make decisions over everything. So whatever it is, there's not responsibility given to somebody like we give to trustees, and we say, okay, trustees, we need mops and we need to have cleaning materials, we need rags and we need paper towels, we need cups to drink out of. When we need them, they make sure that they're here. In a congregationalist church, it seems petty, but everything is voted on. So the congregation essentially runs everything. If you look at the biblical mandate, there's nothing biblically that shows that kind of involvement on the part of the congregation. But there are congregationalist churches, and they call it congregationalist polity. So that's how they run and operate their church. You also see in Episcopal churches, some of the more liturgical churches like Lutheran churches, you see this word for bishop used incorrectly. They assign a bishop, and when they say a bishop, what they mean is a pastor of an entire region. So they may have all of Northern California, and they're over all the pastors and all the churches in that region, and they call them the bishop of that region. And like I say, that falls into Lutherans, Episcopalians, some Anglican churches are that way as well. Obviously, the Roman Catholic Church falls into that category. Everybody can see the structure there. Then everything is coordinated through what the bishop rules, which is called the diocese. And everything has to go through there. So if the church wants to make an addition to the church building, they have to go to the diocese to get approval. If they want to do anything significant in the church, the diocese has to approve it. So that's run that way. Baptist churches, Southern Baptist churches, and most Protestant churches are autonomous churches. And what that means is we make our own decisions. So when it comes to making decisions, like when we replace these windows, the trustees got together, they said, okay, we've been having this on our list for a while, we've got this grant money now, we're going to go ahead and replace the windows. And the trustees made the decision. You couldn't do that under a diocese situation. But we're autonomous, meaning we make our own decisions internally. We are part of the Southern Baptist Convention, And the convention is actually there not to rule us, but to serve us. And so when, being a small church, we have somebody like Phil Kell come in that we've had a couple of times since I've been here now. He comes as a service to us. And so the funds that we pay into the convention, and the bigger churches pay into the convention, they pay huge amounts of money into the convention, and they help subsidize the work that they do for us. Because what we pay the convention every year, we couldn't even have paid Phil Kell to come here twice. I mean, he's a very high dollar guy. He's an attorney, and so, you know, he's running that whole foundation office. But we couldn't afford as a church to just say, we want to have somebody like that come in and teach us about the things he's taught us about. So they are there to serve us, and so everything that all the churches pay into that, they say, okay, what do we need? Well, we need a group of people that know how to do church planning. And so they hire people in the convention to come and do church plants, and then they come out and train people. Okay, you want to do a church plant here? They'll help raise the money. They'll help do all of that, and they'll come in and do a church plant, put a pastor there, and make sure that it gets a good start. We now have something called a healthy church group, which it means that if you've got a church that's struggling, we can have that group come in, and they can say, here's what you need to do, A, B, C, D, and this is how you need to do it. And they can help us do those things. So that's the difference. They're there to serve us rather than us having to get approval from them for everything. We don't get approval for anything because we're autonomous churches. So the Bible, how does the Bible see the structure? And what does the Bible tell us? What kind of broad structure does it give us? And the Southern Baptist Convention falls nicely into the biblical structure of how the Bible tells us to run a church, what kind of organization we're to have. The Bible only gives general organizational structures. The church is not so much an organization biblically as an organism. You hear Paul talk about the body of Christ, each part doing its part. So the structure of the church is an organism, and the question is, how does that organism function? Who is the head of that organism, and how is it to function? If the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, or is defeating what the left hand's doing, that church isn't going to function because the organism isn't functioning properly. If I go to feed myself and my hands keep throwing food out of my plate, I'm not going to do very well. I won't survive long. And so the organism has to function properly, and the Bible gives us that instruction in terms of deacons, elders, and how the pastors are to teach and so forth. The organism is functioning parts. Let's talk about healthy and unhealthy organisms, and you can kind of relate this to the human body, and because the Bible does. Unhealthy organisms have non-functioning parts. If I'm right-handed and my right hand doesn't work, I don't feed myself well. I don't use a screwdriver very well. I don't do anything very well because I'm not accustomed to using my left hand. If neither hand works, non-functioning parts mean an unhealthy organism. It's the reason that continually I talk to you on Sunday mornings about the fact that what we need to be making sure of is that every single person that's a part of the body of Christ has a ministry, because that's a functioning part. A non-functioning part is one that comes and just sits. If they come and just sit, that's non-functioning. God has a role for them. He has something for them to do here. That's the reason that we need to help people find their spiritual gifts. Functioning parts that are not consistent. They work part of the time, they don't work part of the time. You can't count on them to be there to do that, to feed the face, whatever. Only a functioning part, they only function part-time. Missing parts, just some of the parts are missing altogether. And or functioning parts that don't coordinate. They function, but they're doing all the wrong things. I pick up a hammer, instead of hitting the nail, I hit myself in the head. You know, that's the wrong thing. It's functioning, it's working hard, but it's defeating the body. And that happens consistently in churches, And it's what kills many churches, is functioning parts that don't coordinate, don't coincide, don't work together, or cancerous parts that are literally eating other parts. You have somebody that comes that's a blessing to the church, and some of the parts get angry at that person and they leave. No good reason. They just leave. Why do they leave? It's not worth the battle. It's not worth the battle of fighting that. Why does God encourage us at the very beginning of this passage to be hospitable? Here's a good reason why. Hospitality doesn't mean doing everything for somebody. It means helping them achieve the goal with the gifts that you've got. And if, just as an example, when today I met a young guy at the mission. He's there he's only been there less than a month. And so he's telling me a little bit about himself, and he was telling me some things that another guy had told me he was interested in. I don't know anything about this, and so I went, "Hey, Jimmy, come over here. Have you talked to this guy about this?" He said, "No." I said, "He's interested in that same thing you're interested in. You guys get together." Why? Because I don't function in that, because I don't understand what they're talking about. They can talk 2 minutes and they've left me. So I want to put people together that have common interests, common thoughts, to help them. But because I had spent time with them, I knew how to accomplish that. So I'm not in the way. I'm not in there trying to do something I'm not meant to do. I just put people together that are meant to do it. Okay? Any questions about any of that so far? Clear as mud? All right. Church organisms. They're simple, but they're not single cell. They're not single person. They're not single cell organisms. It's the body of Christ. The whole body has functions, and every part has to do its part. When one part tries to do everybody else's part, if I'm the head and I'm trying to do the job of the hand, I don't do it very effectively. If I'm trying to walk on my face, I don't do that very effectively. Right? So every part is, the Bible says in Ephesians 4, each part does its part, not somebody else's part. Each part does its part. Multiple part organisms, each is doing its part, Ephesians 4. Each part does not work independently, but each part rather works interdependently. We can't function independently in the body of Christ, because everybody just going and doing whatever comes doesn't get God's work done. So it's interdependently, and that assumes the organization that God planned for the church. Okay? Not independently, but interdependently. Okay, biblical mandates. These are instructions that are commands of how to accomplish the work. First, let's look at Hebrews 13:17, and this is a mandate from God. He says, "Have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority, because they keep watch over you as those who they must give an account." One translation says it this way: they keep watch over your souls. Think about that. Have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority, because they keep watch over your souls as those who must give an account. One day, I will stand before God all alone, face to face, and I will have to give an account for everything I've done as a leader, of the pastor of this church and every church I've led. I'm going to have that accounting. And I'm going to have to give an account for the things that I've done well, things I haven't done well, things that I've done wrong, things I haven't brought correction to, things I haven't amplified that are really good in any particular body. All of those things I'll have to give an account to, and this instruction says, be aware of that with your pastors. Be aware of that when you're talking to Pastor Tom or about Pastor Tom. Be aware that he's got the responsibility that one day he'll stand before God and give an account for what he's done that's contributed to the ultimate resolution of your soul. It says, do this so that, there's a purpose statement. Now he's going to tell us why. Do this so that their work, the work of the pastor, will be a joy and not a burden. For that would be of no benefit to you. Hebrews 13:17. Yes, the Bible clearly states that God gives some individuals spiritual authority over others. There are various levels of authority in a person's life, and each of these levels may involve different people in different positions of authority. So let's look at just three here, two that don't apply to us because we don't have anybody. Well, we've got two people in the elders role, Pastor Tom and myself. The Bible always speaks in terms of elders as a plurality of elders. There is never to be one elder. There never should be one pastor without another elder. One of the reasons I was so anxious to have Pastor Tom come join us here is because I cannot be the lone pastor in a church. It's not biblical. There are to be other elders. The plurality of elders makes the decisions for the spiritual direction of the church. That is the ministry plan and how to carry out the ministry plan. That's the role of the multiple plurality of elders. It doesn't leave it in one person's role. It's always leave it in multiple people's role. Why? Because one person may have a bias. All the people in that group will have a bias. But they come together and pray over what those roles are and what the ministry plan ought to be and how to carry that ministry plan out. And together, they prayerfully come together with a plan. And God says he blesses this plurality of elders. There's always to be more than one elder in a church. If you ever have a pastor without other elders, it's a recipe for disaster. I don't care how good they are, how wonderful they are, what great preaching they have. It's never healthy. So what we're seeing in this instruction is, here is how you have a healthy body. So elders include pastors over the spiritual ministry plan and direction of the church. The direction the church is going to go, the ministry plan to accomplish that direction being accomplished, and then how to carry that out with the people God has planted in the church. So that when I come to Linda about the children's ministry, I come to Linda and I say, Linda, here's the ministry plan. It begins here, it ends here, and within that framework right there, you have total liberty to get the work done. But don't go outside of that framework. Don't do more, don't do less. Fit the framework, but then use the gifts God's given you, the creativity he's given you, the thoughts he's given you to fill that frame out. And it's my responsibility as a pastor to give that kind of instruction and to provide the authority to get that done and the resources to get that done. You never give somebody a responsibility without the authority and the resources. So that's part of my responsibility, is to say, I know you can't do what we haven't got money to do. So now we got to trim this to this level. And here's how we got to function. Don't add anything to, don't take anything away, because this is the plan, and here's the reason why. Watch this, everybody. This plan for the children has to fit the overall ministry plan, to where this ministry plan ends, there's another ministry plan that comes right up against that and seals against it. Now, when somebody steps outside of this ministry plan over here for children, they're walking on somebody else's ministry. You follow me? So all of this has to fit together, just like puzzles. We were down in Santa Rosa for Father's Day, and we left here that Sunday morning and went to Santa Rosa. There was an older couple sitting in this building we went to, putting puzzles together, and it looked like it must have 20,000 pieces. I mean, there's little tiny puzzle pieces everywhere. Why somebody gets a kick out of that, I don't understand, but they did. They finished the thing. But if any of those puzzle pieces don't fit, you don't just sit there and go and try to cram it in place. It doesn't work. It doesn't fit, it doesn't look good, it won't work, it won't function. If those are gears in an automobile and you try to force them, they're not going to work either, are they? Is he? It's got to fit. You can't put transmission gears in some other geared thing. It's just not going to work. The deacons take and look at that ministry plan and say, okay, here's our facility, and the deacons are primarily biblically servants. They're waiters. If you go back and look at the mandate in Acts when the deacons were called, they were called because there wasn't people to serve the tables. That's their role. They're servants. That's the very meaning of the word deacon. Servant. So they're to fill out and do the things to make the elder's role work. When I have to come in here and clean the church, I'm taking away from my role. Why? Because that's a diversion. It's a distraction. Jim was in here yesterday cleaning the church. Lori came in and said, well, where did Jim leave off? And I went, I don't know where Jim left off. And a little bit Izzy showed up and mowed the yard. All that stuff that's getting done isn't done necessarily by the deacons, but it is typically the responsibility of a deacon to make sure that it gets done. All of this stuff back here, this audiovisual stuff, that's temporal, mechanical stuff. It falls into the role of those deacons to make sure that not only all that stuff works, but there's somebody back there to work it. That's part of the deacon's role, typically. They're servants. They're filling the gaps. They're making things happen. If chairs get worn, they go, okay, we're going to take this chair out. It's worn. It looks bad. I'm going to get it out of here. I'm going to replace it. I'm going to make sure that, we had a candlelight service in here one time and there was wax all over the chairs. The trustees jumped in there and figured out how to get the wax off the chairs. It's little stuff that it needs to be done. But the deacons typically say, okay, it's facilities, it's budget, it's fundraising. A lot of the stuff that I've done in the way of writing grants and that kind of stuff, I've always had deacon boards do before. They just step up, they get the job done. They say, okay, we need grant money for this. We need to do this for our children to go to camp. We need to do this and this and this. That instruction is given to them by the elders, the things that need to be. The deacons make sure it gets done. So now the body's functioning together. Trustees, which is what we have in this church, we don't have deacons, but we've got trustees. We don't have people that feel like that their qualifications as deacons are met, so we don't have deacons. That's the reason we don't have deacons. But the trustees actually are a legal part of the corporate structure. So they're not a biblical role. You won't find trustees in here, okay? But our trustees, every church has trustees. Usually it's the deacon board that functions as the trustees of the church. And the trustees have legal, what they call fiduciary responsibilities. And that means that as trustees, they're listed on the corporate documents as trustees, and that their fiduciary responsibility means that their responsibility is to put the church ahead of everything else they've got going on business-wise, everything else, because the fiduciary has to, if it comes down to the old windows we took out of here, okay, what are we going to do with them? I don't even know what we did with them, but what are we going to do with them? Well, I want them. Why? Because I can sell them. Well, why don't we give them to the mission? Because they got a place they can use them. And when you got one trustee that says, no, I'm going to take them and sell them, that's inappropriate. He's not acting as a fiduciary. He's acting personally, selfishly. You see what I'm saying? So that's the kind of thing you want to make sure that you've got responsible people in the role as deacons. Normally they're set over practical or temporal things in order to free up the teachers and elders. I gave the example Sunday morning of a group of guys in the church in Cincinnati, Ohio, that just came in, went to the pastor's backyard, and took chainsaws and log splitters and went back there and cut all his wood up and split it and piled it up for him. Why? Because they didn't want him to have to take his time to do that kind of thing. They'd rather for him to spend his time studying and doing the things that brings the Word of God to them. And they knew that that guy, just like I do, spends an exorbitant amount of time in study. So their responsibility is to look and see, not wait for somebody to tell them, but look and see, how can I make Pastor Tom's life easier? When he got ready to move, who showed up with pickup trucks and went up there and moved furniture and made sure they had food to eat and all that kind of stuff? See, that's the kind of thing we're talking about, just seeing it and pitching in and getting it done. Okay, let's look at the elders again. Here's the qualifications. Qualifications for bishop, elder, pastor, all the same thing. We'll see Sunday morning how some of these things have been misinterpreted and how we've ended up with bishops that are over whole regions rather than being biblically what a bishop's to be. Bishop is just an elder or a pastor. You find it in 1 Timothy 3, 1-7. Here's a trustworthy saying. I've read this to you. Let me give you the last part of this. From Titus 1, it says, he must not be a recent convert, and he may become conceited if he's given this high responsibility and he's only a recent convert. He might fall into the same judgment as the devil. He must also have a good reputation with outsiders. So you see some of the same qualifications in both of these biblical passages. Paul is telling both, be sure these are the kind of men you've got in these roles. Deacons, as I said, essentially the same qualifications except that the elders must be able to teach. Pastors, also called shepherds throughout the Scripture. And it says in 1 Peter 2:25, I don't know if you remember this, it's not been that long ago that I preached it. Shepherds and overseers are the overseers of your souls. Shepherds, overseers of your souls. This is the titles that are paint a picture of what a shepherd is to be. The word shepherd is a translation from the Greek word poime. What English word do we get from that? Poem, exactly. Yeah, it's the word poem. Now think about that. The word for shepherd is poem. He is coordinating. He is orchestrating. He is writing the symphony, writing the words of poetry, conducting the symphony, and carrying out the responsibility of overseeing all of that. You got a conductor in front. He's bringing in the bassoons the same time he's bringing down the trumpets. He's doing all of that. That's the picture, is the coordination that is like poetry in motion. That's what the pastor is to oversee, not to go, as I've said before, not to go do all the ministries. That's part of the problem we got right now. I am the prison ministry. I am the Veritas ministry. We need people to come do that. Tonight I am the AV guy. You see? We need people that say, that's my calling. That's my calling. Because I know when that's done right, I got 200 guys in Africa and another 150 guys in this country that are going to be blessed. And those 200 guys in Africa are pastors that they'll go back and affect tens of thousands of people in their churches. Why? Because they're learning from what we do here. This is their classroom. This is their laboratory. But when that's not done, they don't learn. And part of our ministry fails. Our ministry is not just to make everybody inside the walls of the church feel good. Our ministry is to do God's work that He's given us to do. He's blessed us with the ability to do the things that we're doing here that are blessing tens of thousands of people that none of us will ever meet. Now, most of those 200 pastors over there that are in there listening and doing this stuff every week, I know them personally because I've been over there and I've been part of their training up. So I know, I've been in a lot of their churches. I have a personal connection to that. I know none of you do, but think about this. If you knew the people that this was going back to, and it was blessing their congregation, and you know we have the ability to do that. You feel horrible when it doesn't get done. Why? Because the pastor is not to have to be in 3 places at once. He is to conduct the symphony. He is to bring out the music, the poetry that fits together, that there's rhyme and rhythm and joy in. So that's the word poime. Translated pastor. Someone who tends the herd or flock. Uses the metaphor of a Christian pastor because pastors should guide the flock, lead the flock. In other words, the pastor is the overseer, puts together the ministry plan, structures it, makes provision for it, and gives instruction for it. It starts here, it ends here. You don't take away from it, you don't add to it, and that way all those parts begin to fit together. From the women's ministry, the children's ministry, everything. Even the prison ministry fits in here. We got a young guy that's leaving there in a couple of months. His first stop is this church on Sunday morning. When he leaves there on Saturday, he's spending the night here. He's going to be here Sunday morning, the night after he leaves. Why? Because I've impressed upon those guys that they have a responsibility to come bless you guys. Why? Because you've contributed to their growth spiritually. You've been right in there writing the cards, doing the things that need to be done, and I'm there every Saturday carrying those cards in and praying with those guys and teaching them. But they want you to know how important that is to them. I got 2 guys there that I think are going to go into ministry. I really do. Think about how many people will be affected by 2 more pastors out there that have been trained up as a result of the ministry here. You know, we've got to see this as being bigger than we see it. We're not looking at this God size. We're looking at this as this half dozen people sitting in this room. And this is what's going on. We had 28 people up there today for the first day of Veritas Bible Institute. 28. Place was packed out. About a third to a half of those were past graduates that came from the mission, that heard that we were going to do this. One guy graduated over 6 years ago. He's back today because he wants to be a pastor. And this is where he's going to get his training. I get more excited about it than anybody else, I think. Those in the flock of the shepherd. Clearly, any member of the flock that is not following the shepherd, under shepherd, is not a part of the flock. Are to be taught by the shepherd. Ephesians 4 says the responsibility of the shepherd is to feed the flock, to teach them, train them up, teach them to do ministry. The Christian leader also comforts the sheep, binds up their wounds, applying the balm and compassion and love. As a great shepherd of Israel, the Lord himself promised to bind up the injured and the weak that need strengthening. I saw Gordon today, just as I was getting ready to leave. It's a guy that came and sat right back there about 3 Sundays ago. All by himself, came in here, sat down. I didn't remember talking to him. He says, I talked to him on the street up here over a year ago. I have no recollection of that. So he shows up here a year later. Pastor Tom knows him. Oh yeah, I know you. I know your brother. Da-da-da. How's your brother doing? Da-da-da. His brother used to run with Brian Hall that runs the mission. Brian says, yeah, I remember laying up in such and such a building over here doing drugs with your brother. All those pieces begin to fit together, and he sees Brian's changed life. He sees Brian's leadership there, totally running that mission up there now. And he goes, you're the head guy here? And he goes, yeah. He says, I remember my brother talking about you, man. I'd have never got that. He sees firsthand what God's doing in somebody's life. Pastor Tom's right there to lend him support every day, and he knows the family. And there he is across the room waving as I'm getting ready to leave today. That's every part doing its part. The shepherd used a crook. Remember the Psalm 23 talks about a rod and a staff? You know what the rod and the staff are? Anybody? Okay, the crook, that's to grab hold of the sheep, pull him back when he's in danger. The rod is what the shepherd would use to take out the wolf or the bear or somebody coming in to steal or hurt the flock. But it also was used to correct the flock. If he has one sheep that keeps wandering off and the other sheep follow him and he's just always getting in trouble, he leads them off and they go over a cliff or they get hung up in briars, and this one sheep just constantly is leading them off. A shepherd in those days would take his rod and break the sheep's leg so that he couldn't lead the other rest of them away. He'd put it into a splint and make him hobble around right next to him. So there was correction involved. There was protection involved. So the rod and the staff, the rod, correction, protection, the staff, protection, pulling that lamb back, pulling him and putting them where they need to be. The Christian leader corrects and disciplines those that are in his care when they go astray, without rancor or without overbearing spirit, but with a spirit of gentleness, Galatians 6:2. Those in leadership must correct according to the scriptural principles. Correction and discipline is never a pleasant experience for either party, but the Christian leader who fails in this area is not exhibiting love, as love is defined biblically, for those who he is put in charge of or to care for. The Lord disciplines those he loves, Proverbs 3:12. And the Christian leader must follow the great shepherd's example in doing that. So pastor, specifically, just the shepherd used the crook to pull back the wandering sheep back into the fold, so the Christian leader corrects and disciplines those in his care that go astray, without any of that rancor and bitterness we find listed in Galatians 6. The Lord disciplines those he loves from Proverbs 23. So let's talk about here what not the specifics of the ministry plan, but just how this was all designed to work. And I've been over this multiple times before in terms of the fact that this is how this is to work. The pastors are responsible for putting together a ministry plan. What's in the ministry plan? Everything that we've got planned for that year. Throughout the year, Pastor Tom and I have met. We met today, as a matter of fact, about the ministry plan of this church. And we look at it and say, okay, this is working, this isn't working. We need to tweak this, we need to change that, we need to move this over here. When we put together the ministry plan for this church, almost a year ago now, it was the beginning of our fiscal year, we had people that we don't have here now. And we've got people here now that we didn't have then. So God is shifting those people around, and we need to make adjustments accordingly. So we come in, we make changes to the ministry plan for the children's ministry. Why? Because every piece of that change has to do with how all those other pieces need to fit together better. It needs to be more family focused, even when we don't have those families here. The women's ministry needed a certain type of teaching and training and mentoring process that's beginning to take place there. And so that whole focus changed. The men's ministry, same thing. The focus changed to doing soaps and the stuff we're doing together with some of the other churches. I met with Pastor Craig this week as well, because Pastor Mike from Weot has left. He's not here anymore. He's going down to work at Teen Challenge down in Southern California somewhere. So that's going to be his new role. He's got a really nice position down there working with Teen Challenge. But he was ramrodding that. So suddenly we don't have that leader in place anymore. So we need to change things. We need to move things around. We need to change them. And so I went to Pastor Craig and I said, look, I'm starting up this Bible Institute. I've got everything going at the prison. I know you're a busy guy because you got all these businesses all over town. If you're not willing to take this up, I'm not willing to continue to have our churches meet together. So he said, I'll take it up. So now that's in his court. It's his responsibility to guide it and direct it. It's my responsibility now to fall under his leadership and allow him to lead it. You see? If I suddenly went in there and started trying to do things, now I'm interfering with what his role is. So I'm not to do that. I'm doing to strengthen and encourage him and support him, and anything I can see I can do to make his job easier, that's what I do. I don't jump in there and try to do things differently than what he's doing them. Plurality of elders, we've already talked about. Delegated to members by the plurality of elders and confirmed by the church. So the ministry plan is delegated to members by the elders. So we come in and we say, okay, we've got this group of people that we want to meet and come up with somebody to run the children's ministry, somebody to head up the women's ministry, somebody to take over the prison ministry. And that group of people meets and they coordinate the selection of a group of people to do those things. And then we vote on that as a church that is confirmed by the church. So it comes from the elders to this committee and then back to the church for their vote. That's the way we work. So the congregation is in essence affirming the work that's been done by that committee and by the elders. The elders have been given the responsibility to make sure that there's a ministry plan in place. It's also their responsibility to make sure that these other people get placed in these roles. And that's why the committee in this church was formed. Okay, those members who have been given these ministries have a specific plan they are to carry out. They have the authority to carry out that plan and not some other plan, not some additional plan, but that plan. And the provisions have to be made to make sure that they've got all the resources they need. If they need computers, if they need money, if they need gasoline, whatever they need, the resources have to be there or you don't give them the responsibility of doing it. It'd be silly for me to give somebody the responsibility of taking a group to South Africa this next year. Why? Because we don't have the resources to do it. We just don't have the resources. So it would be silly for me to say, that's what I want to do. Although I want to do it. We don't have the resources to do it. So they've got to have the provisions. They've got to have the resources to fulfill the plan. Pastors are to guide the ministry leaders toward a goal. Here, I kind of see myself, once you get to this place, I see myself as a coach. I come in and say, this is working, this isn't working. Why are we doing this? Why are we not doing this, which is part of the plan, the original plan you were given? Why are these people not doing what we laid out? Is there a reason? And then all of that should be adjusted as you go along to make sure that those things are being carried out. Now that's quite different than if you've got a single pastor that is the sole elder, because then he's just making all of those decisions. I'm not making these decisions. There's a plurality of elders that have put this together, and then all we're doing is kind of overseeing, which is our job, to make sure the oversight is done, to make sure those pieces are functioning as they should. Otherwise, everybody brings potato salad. Nobody brings any meat. Right? So if we didn't have Sandy to make sure that, I mean, I'd bring potato salad every time because I like potato salad. But maybe I don't need to bring potato salad. Anybody get the point? Okay. We'll move on. So the ministry plan, it is the ministry leader's responsibility to initiate the plan, to engage the pastors for mentoring, and as the ministry plan is unfolding. In other words, if you're over a ministry, it is not the pastor's role to come in unless they see something's wrong. If they see something's wrong, then it's their role to come in and say, why is this not going the way it ought? But it is the person's role to come to the pastor and say, I want to talk about how this is going. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're not doing well. Do you have any thoughts there? And then tweak that and fine-tune it all along. That should be the ministry leader's role, whether it's women's ministry, children's ministry, men's ministry, prison ministry, the Veritas Forum, whatever it is, that has to come back together. This is fine-tuning. I told the guys today, we're just kicked off the Bible Institute today, and I told those guys, I said, you guys are the pilot program. So what I want you to do is I want you to help me figure out where we're not filling the potholes, where there's things going wrong, because you're going to see things I don't see. So don't think you can't come to me. You ought to come to me. Tell me where the problems are and the corrections need to be made, because we need to tweak this all along. And I'm only going to be here once a month. Once a month, I can't know what's going on. So their responsibility is to come to me and say, these things are working, these things aren't working, and then we can tweak them and fine-tune them and make sure that they continue on like they should. Otherwise, they're going to fester and get bad. And this is the biblical model. If you look at what Paul does when he sends Timothy into Ephesus, he sends this young pastor in there, he trains him up, he sends him into a place he knows has huge problems, and then all along he's writing Timothy, giving him instruction as to how to do ministry there. And he's taking the problems Timothy has and he's addressing them. Oh, you got these two women, Yodia and Syntyche. Boy, they sound like some real bad apples. Look what they're doing to the rest of the congregation. They are really tearing the place apart. Timothy, here's what you need to do. Tell them this, this, and this. Tell them Paul said. So he gives them instruction. This is what you need to do. All through our ministry, I constantly am in contact with pastors that are older in ministry and wiser than I am. Here's where I am. What do I need to do? And I listen. Most of the time I take their advice. Sometimes I don't. But I'm always going to listen to what somebody wiser and smarter than me has to say about a particular thing. So there's your basic biblical structure. And when we get into Sunday morning into 1 Peter, what you're going to see is Peter begins to deal with some more specific kinds of things. And he's going to give us clear instruction as to how to deal with some of those things. So this fits right up against that. Here's the biblical structure. Here's the qualifications. Here's what the elders' role, the deacons' role, in this church, the trustees' role. Here's how the pastors are to work. Here's their responsibility as overseers. Here is the poetry they put in motion. And that poetry should sing. When people come into this church, they should see all the parts doing their parts, every gear meshing against the other. I went into Izzy will relate to this, and probably David too. I went into the auto parts place over there at Napa store in Garberville the other day. And I'm standing there waiting in line because I don't know where the stuff is I need to find. And they got that little gear thing in there you can turn. It has all the oil in it, you know. So I'm sitting here watching this and I'm thinking, this is how the church is supposed to be. It's a well-oiled machine and all the gears fit and one gear carries the oil to the other and it makes it all lubricate and it works. And there it is. There's the church right there. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? There's a little thing. And so I'm sitting here turning this, and the guy comes up, and he looks at me and he says, "Are you having fun?" I said, "Yep, I am. This is the church. That's the way it's supposed to be." And when it's not, when there's a gear missing, when there's no oil in the machine, it doesn't work properly. It needs fine-tuning, absolutely. So, just telling David, I took my truck up to Eureka today, and the guy back here said that he couldn't do what needed to be done. And so I took it up there, and they put it on all the more sophisticated machines, and he's got back here. And so they come up with a code, and I said, okay, what's that code mean? He says, it means you need to do this, this, and this. I said, that's not the code he got back here. And he said, well, he doesn't have much of a machine back here. So everybody's got to criticize everybody else, but he says, this is the code we got to address. And this is how we need to do it. And it's only going to cost you $675. I said, how long is that going to take? About 30 minutes. 30 minutes, $675. Took all day to get to the point that they could tell me it was going to take 30 minutes. Each part doing its part, right? All right, anybody? Questions? Answers? Poetry? All right. Elva, would you dismiss us in prayer, please?